Good morning to everyone, and welcome to this Kevin webinar on making changes stick. Today's webinar is kindly hosted by Alan Bately of Blue Sky Horizons. Our event today will be 45 minutes of presentation by Alan, followed by a Q&A session on any specific questions you might have. For those who want to ask a question, there's an option in the Zoom menu for Q&A, which you can use to ask us a question at any time during the presentation. So without much further ado, I'll hand over to Alan, who will take us through the presentation.
Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome. First of all, I'd like to sort of say that this is a relatively new concept to me. I'm more used to interactive workshops where you get people involved and you shout at them and they shout at me, and we sort of work things through together. So this is a sort of one-way conversation for 30 to 45 minutes, followed by hopefully some interesting questions, which I will do my best to answer. Okay, so quick introduction, a background, who I am. I'm basically a guy who worked as a toolmaker many years ago. I then moved into working with apprentices, graduate development, and in various manufacturing roles, mainly in the management roles, mainly in the manufacturing industry, which included one of my favorite jobs, which was called, I worked in PIGS Group, and PIGS stood for Performance Improvement Group. And that really created my interest in change and how things change and why things don't sort of go the way you want them to go. So we can talk a bit about that later. I set up my own business in 1990 and I've been running it since. What I do, my work is based around four strands really. It's about lean systems thinking, one-to-one coaching and leadership development, and that all fits into what I call strategic approach to a business, trying to get them to move forward in the right direction. What we're going to talk about today really is about change, and we're going to talk about how we can introduce and utilize a methodology to enable change to stick and to make it worthwhile. My experience through introducing change has been that I've learned quite a few methods of not doing it properly, and hopefully this is something slightly different, which will just give you that opportunity to kick it off in a more exciting manner then. It's a 30 to 45 minute presentation, and if you've got questions, please write them down and make a note of them, and we will answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. The first thing, what is change? What do we mean by change? Secondly, why bother? Why bother to change? Why not stick to how we are? The challenge of change. Then how do we make change stick? How do we ensure that our change doesn't go away? And then any final thoughts that I've got based on my experience of failing many times and succeeding a few times. Also, I'd like you to name that mountain on the right-hand side of the slide, if you can see it, and I'll ask you at the end what you think it is. So that's part of the test. Okay, so let's move on and look at different types of change. What do we mean by change? We talk about incremental change, which is otherwise known as continuous improvement. And incremental change is about doing things better. It's small changes to products, services, and processes. But these small incremental changes over a period of time can mass up to huge benefits and large changes. So it's small steps adding up eventually to quite significant change. The second type of change we talk about is radical change, or what we call innovation. And innovation is more likely to be something that's a breakthrough then. for example, a step change or something like a new product, say a 3D printer. That was an innovation when it appeared, but now 3D printers are fairly standard. People have got 3D printers. So the concept of a 3D printer now is about continuous improvement. How do we make 3D printers better? So the innovation was the 3D printer. The incremental continuous improvement is that you are now getting better 3D printers, and they're becoming cheaper and just as sophisticated for a much lower price. Okay, so the other thing about change is not just about change for change's sake. And I think people go through this process of making change without understanding what they're actually doing and what they want out of it. And this thing about improvement, if you need to improve, you have to change. And this thing I've written on the bottom of the slide, all improvement is change, but not all change is improvement. And I think that's a really key message for people to understand, that just changing for the sake of it can be negative, can be disruptive, and can cause failure. And then why bother to change? Well, let's look at some examples of organizations who didn't bother to change. So the British motorcycle industry in the 60s was the world leader, and the British motorcycle industry was envied by everyone across the world. They were wiped out in a process of about 5 or 10 years by, they failed to see the threat from the Japanese, who brought in small, clean machines that didn't break down. The philosophy of the British motorcycle industry was that people wanted these large machines which broke down because they were engineers, they wanted to play with them. The Japanese created a completely different market, had a completely different approach, and actually wiped out the British motorcycle industry. The British car industry has disappeared. Quality, delivery, etc. became a problem. We've been wiped out by the Germans with Audi, Volkswagen, etc. And the Japanese. It doesn't really exist. We're now making cars in Britain, but we're making them for the Germans and the Japanese, which is quite interesting. I can get my accounts done in India. There's accountants who think they are safe because no one can copy what they are doing. I then met an accountant the other day who says he sends his accounts to India, they're done, and they're returned in the next day. Done, finished, no problem. And then we have people sitting around thinking, well, I run a furniture company. There's no way that anyone in China can sort of replace what we are doing, because the cost of transporting them through a shipping container is too high. But actually, the Chinese found a way to manufacture the product and package it in a way which reduces the size significantly. And now the shipping of that product is economically viable. So that the challenge of the Chinese has hit the furniture industry. And another, why bother to change? You know, I show you a list. If you look on your screen, you'll see a number of organizations there, some of whom don't exist anymore. Blockbuster was a massive organization which we used to go to get our videotapes. Remember them? And our CD packages, take them home, watch a film, etc., etc. Disappeared. Netflix came in, completely changed the world there. Tower Records, go and buy a record, go and put it on your turntable. Spotify and these other sort of online music stations that have taken that over. Bookshops, etc. They've all disappeared because they didn't see change coming, or they didn't anticipate change. And my question is, what about your company? In your company, are you looking forward? Are you anticipating and hoping to move with the times and change? Are you complacent? And if you are complacent, look back at the list, because that's what's happened to many of those huge organization. Okay, so one of the sort of concepts of change is that it's not about the strongest company that survives. It's the one that's able to respond to change, and the one that's able to create that scenario where they can live with the current and future requirements of the business world. So you have to be responsive. 2 seconds, drink of water. Okay, excuse me. So how do you see change? Do you see it as a challenge? A lot of people see change, oh my God, change again, here we go. Or do you see it as an opportunity? And I think the mindset that you take towards change is really important. If you see it as something we have to do and is something that's getting in the way of business, then it will become a problem. You have to see change as something that is an opportunity to improve and do something better or do something different, which will enable your organization to continue and survive. And here's some of the companies that sort of ignored that. And these are quite funny, I think, but they're true. So I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. So somebody didn't really see the opportunities. However, this guy was the chairman of IBM. So that caused a few problems with IBM. Never really anticipated the world of PCs and computers and lost a lot of the market that they were world leaders in. We don't like this sound of guitar music is on the way out. Okay, and that was somebody rejecting the Beatles in 1962. And I think they live to regret that. Thomas Edison, who invented the telephone and also had quite a number of companies he ran, but his vision was, I believe that eventually every city will have one. Okay, so the problem with that vision is that he doesn't go into telephone manufacturing. So lost out on a completely massive market. And there is no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home. This was the president of DEC, which again was a major organization. So sometimes we just don't see it. We don't actually see what's happening. But then we know all this. We know this. So why is it there's so many attempts to change and introduce improvement or improvement initiatives, start with a flourish, and then they fade out and die completely? And I know this through experience, having been working, as I said, I worked in performance improvement group, which was PIG's group. And my job was to find things to improve and to improve them and make them stick. And the number of times I failed was significant, but I kept going. And eventually you learn how to succeed. And this is possibly something we're going to talk about now in a couple of minutes. But making change happen is not easy, and it's not easy to make it stick. Why do people resist change? So I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Why do people resist change? And then I thought, hang on, is that a right question? I then discovered they don't resist change, they resist being changed. And that's a slightly different philosophy than resisting change. So I want you, if you're all sitting there, I want you to do something for a minute, a little experiment. I just want you, if you can, just fold your arms. So I'm assuming you're all, fold your arms, just fold your arms as you normally do, and sit there with your arms folded for a minute, for 10 seconds. Okay, now unfold your arms. So just unfold them, shake them about, whatever you do with them. And then I want you to fold them the other way. So if you folded them originally left over right, I want you to fold them right over left. So you're folding your arms in a different way. So you fold right over left if you're originally left over right, and left over right if you're originally right over left. And that usually feels quite uncomfortable. And, you know, it's a simple thing about change is initially it can feel uncomfortable. So unfold your arms a second, unfold them completely, then refold them. If you refold them, 99% of people go back to the original way they folded their arms, which is a lesson on change. People don't want to change unless they see something in it for them. So we go back to basics, we go back to where we were, we go back to our original concepts unless we see an opportunity or a process which enables us to move forward. Okay, so let's move on. So people often resist change for what they perceive as good reasons, such as security is threatened. You know, I could lose my job. I worked with one company, they wanted to change one of the departments, they wanted to make it more efficient, they wanted to do some lean systems thinking and so on. I said, yeah, great, let's do it. I said, what are you going to do with the people when we won't need as many people in this department? Oh, we make them redundant. And I thought, yeah, that's a great way to to motivate the next batch of change that you're going to try and introduce. So we had to work around that, which we did. The change threatens a sense of competence. You're good at one thing, we're asking you to do something different. That can be a problem. Fear of failure. People don't generally like to fail, but you got to get used to that. If you really want to do things differently, you've got to get used to failing at certain things in order to say, right, that didn't work, let's try something else. So it's not failure per se, it's failure sometimes in one of the approaches. People are comfortable with where they are now. Why change? I mean, my comfort zone is fine. They don't know what to change to. So yeah, we're going to change, but where are we going? What are we going? Why are we doing what we're doing? And what's in it for me? The old what's in it for me syndrome. Why should I bother because they are getting everything, I'm getting nothing type of thing. Okay, so that's sort of background to change and some of the resistance to change. But really, when you look at organizations are not the same, are they? Organizations are different. And the problem is with organizations, although they're different, we tend to use the same change process for every organization. You may have heard of Kurt Lewin or Kotter or whatever, which are change processes, which work other than the first bit. And I'll talk to you about that later. So the same change process is used for every organization, although they're different. So I started thinking, what the hell is missing? What is the difference between organizations, and what do we need to recognize and understand before we actually introduce or try to move our improvement forward? And this was part of what I did through my my PhD research, was about sustainable improvement. How do we introduce change that sticks? How do we sustain change? And I found out lots of things, and found out that doing a PhD was bloody hard work as well. That's another story. But I found out lots of things, and I'm going to share some of these with you now. So the first thing I discovered, you have to understand the culture of the organization, and you start from there. Hang on, start from there. So the culture of the organization is a fundamental and key element in change. So let me explain that a bit more. The change has to fit with the culture, not the other way around. The culture has to change to fit the change, if you see what I mean. You have to consider the culture, whether your organization is 2 people or 2,000 people. You have to fit the culture. So the process of change, therefore, is not the same for every organization. It's different. It's different. The process of change varies depending on the culture of the organization. So let's just look at this for 2 minutes about culture. What do we mean by culture and attitudes to change? There's this technical definition by Edgar Schein, who is the sort of guru in the 90s, early 2000s. He is the guru on culture, and he's talking about shared basic assumptions. It's the stuff that you've learned through the work that you do, and that's your shared assumptions of the organization. Okay, yeah. And then another definition of culture, which was about shared values again, what is important to you, and the attitudes and behaviors of the people within the organization. So appropriate attitudes and behaviors is quite an interesting element when you link to culture. But I didn't like that. It's too bloody complicated. I thought, I can't follow all this stuff. So I thought, culture's more about that, surely. And that's how I define culture. It's the way things are around you. It's the way we work. It's what's acceptable to us as an organization, the way we anticipate things, the way we do things, the way things fit together. And if you look at this slide, it's the glue really that holds the business together. It's the glue that goes from the individual to the team to the organization itself and eventually out into the environment. But the problem with the glue is the glue that holds the business together, but it can also be the glue that prevents the business changing and adapting, because the culture becomes the way the organization functions. So the culture can be positive or negative, depending on the organization. So any change initiative has to start by understanding the culture of the organization. And you start from there. You start from understanding the culture, not from, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. How do we work here? How do we actually function? So what I did, I developed a questionnaire, I'll show you now, that sort of helps to identify this. So we start with the culture, and change has to fit the culture. And the process of change is therefore different for organizations, because organizational culture is different. People have different ways of doing things, and the culture within organizations varies, whether you employ 3, 2, 1, 5,000 people, the culture that you actually work within is different from your organization to the next organization. So the key is, whoops, I jumped. I don't know what happened then. The key is, hang on a sec, we need to understand the culture. We need to understand what's going on. So what I did, I developed a questionnaire. And the questionnaire consists of 24 simple questions. If you look on the left-hand side of your screen, I think it's the left. Question 1 is a statement, and then you actually tick whether you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. Question 2, the same. Question 3. And there's 24 simple questions which builds up into the culture questionnaire. The outcome of that will give you a score, and that score will give you a feel for the type of culture that exists within the organization. And what I tend to do, I tend to try to get a number of, so if I'm working with a company that employs, say, 50 people, I would try to get at least 15 people to answer the questionnaire, and to do it in an open way, they give it to me, then I take it away and I use it to analyze the organization. So the outcome of that is that we have a feel for the type of culture that exists within the organization. So let me show you this slide a second. So there's 4 cultures that I identify. So have a read of this a second. There's a lot of words here. So we talk about a supportive, open culture. So this is a very positive organization. It's an organization where the people are up for it. They tend to want to move forward. They've had success in the past. They trust each other. And they've got a leadership which enables them and encourages them to move things on. Then the next sort of scenario is what I call the neutral culture, where they're not necessarily used to change, but people will be sort of up for it, but they just need to be switched on. So there's a sort of untapped opportunity for change there. So you have to work perhaps with a small group of people and get them on board and start spreading that out within the organization. So you're creating change by encouragement, working, nudging, etc. So the next page shows you the other 2 cultures, which I tend to find is fairly common in most organizations, unfortunately. So you've got the apathetic culture, where they don't care less. It's a sort of whatever, if you see what I mean. We are where we are, why should we bother? The whatever type of culture, I can't be bothered, there's too much to do, etc. And then down the bottom, and then if you've got a chance to read that while I'm waffling on, that's the hostile culture, where people are not just not up for change, they're actually against it. And in one way, and I'm not criticizing anyone here, just making a comment, this was one of the problems with the British car industry, why it failed in the 60s, is there was a completely hostile culture to change. There was no way they were going to change. And actually, the biggest change of all occurred then. They got wiped out. So there are cultures where people are hostile to change. That's, in my experience, through the work I've done over the years, I haven't found that to be as common now, although floating between hostile and apathetic, I've definitely had that sort of approach. So 4 sort of approaches and 4 sorts of cultures within organizations which we need to deal with. So the change initiative has to work with the culture of the organization. So you can't just use X approach and that works everywhere. You have to understand the culture. And I keep saying this because people don't do it. They think I'm talking nonsense, but it's true. So you can see from those cultures that I just illustrated that there's a different approach to change when you've got, say, a bunch of people who are up for it and a bunch of people who are completely against it. And yet, we use the same approach. It doesn't work. You have to, with a hostile culture, your first job is to work on sorting out the culture. You work with the culture. With a supportive open, you can just bang it on and people will jump on board. But isn't that obvious? Isn't that obvious? I don't think so. And that's one of the problems, is that it isn't. So let me give you an example. This is a company I am actually working with. It's real. It's not made up. And they employ about 40 people. And they want to do change, etc., etc. They want to introduce new ways of working and so on. So I actually did a SWOT analysis individually with 9 of the senior management team. I didn't have a chance to speak to anyone else, but this is where I started. And I also did the culture analysis. And this is what came out. So if you look at this, I don't know if you can see my arrow up and down, but we've got a range from 50-ish up to 90 of scores. But generally, it's around the apathetic stroke neutral culture. And this is within the senior management team, including the owner and the co-owner. So the culture, if you want to get change within the organization, you've got to get the senior management team switched on to that. So that's how I viewed the culture based on the output from the questionnaire, which I applied. And the problem is they need to be supported through change. They need to be nudged along. They need to recognize that if they don't start working together and moving forward, then they ain't going to succeed. So how do you do that? Well, my plan, I printed all these things out on flip charts. My plan was to go to the company, get those 9 people together, flip charts up around the room, get them walking around, get them to read what we put up, including the SWOT, the culture stuff, sit them back down, talk about it, and then work out how to move forward. Unfortunately, Mr. Coronavirus appeared, so I couldn't do that. So I had to do an online session with the 3 key managers, but I still think we need to do the open session. So some of the things I came up with for the organization in terms of moving forward, they need to work on understanding each other. They need clarity. There's no clarity in the organization. They need a strategy which everyone is bought into. They need management meetings. I know that sounds obvious, but they need meetings with accountability, and they need to be clear, concise, and focused, and people need to be allowed to speak. They need management training for the management team on leadership and other basic requirements. A teamwork exercise for the management team to get them to trust each other and start working together, again, is something I felt would be useful. And one-to-one coaching possibly for some of the individuals. So it was a very good exercise, and when I eventually feed it back to them as a team, it's going to enliven them and awaken them to the culture that exists, and will enable us to start thinking about how we move that forward based on some of the recommendations I originally came up with. Okay, so that's the second question. Where's that waterfall? The first one was the mountain, the second one, the waterfall. So moving forward, if you're talking about change and you're talking about organizational development, and I keep repeating this because it's important. I'm talking about small 3, 4, 5-man businesses, and 1-man, sorry, up to 500, 600 or whatever size of business. You have to embrace the culture, not fight it. You can't fight the culture. You have to embrace it, go with it, and then through the way you manage and lead and enable people to take steps, you start changing the business and changing the culture through that embracing of the culture. Don't try and fight it, because it'll fight back, and it usually wins, actually. So a couple of, ooh, that's the river. I didn't know that was a video, actually, but it's quite nice. Anyway, some final thoughts before we have some questions. Firstly, there are no quick fixes. Allow time for your organization to understand, adapt, and reflect. And I always get people saying back to me, well, we've got to do this urgently. It's a quick fix, we've got to do it. And a year later, they're still trying to do the quick fix. And a year later, they're still trying to do the quick fix because they don't work, because they're trying to do it on the people, not with the people. So actually engaging the people, working within the culture is a quicker fix than just doing it. Believe me. Embed continuous improvement at all levels, support people, get people to understand the change process. Leadership is fundamental, and ensuring that the organization sticks with these priorities. So cultural change together with appropriate measurements and so on linked to what you're trying to achieve enables and helps to create that stickability. But it's the culture that creates the sticking in the long term. To genuinely achieve culture change is a long-term endeavor pursued over many years. It's a big mistake that people, instead of trying to work with the culture, they say, right, we're going to do culture change. No, you don't do culture change. You do change with the culture, and then the culture changes as you're moving forward. Slightly different approach as well. And just a final thought, it's about diagnosis, then action, not the other way around. So a lot of people take action, but actually they haven't done the diagnosis. And it's like, you know, you don't go to the doctor and he says, you need to take some cough medicine, right? And then you tell him what's wrong. Hopefully, the doctor is clever enough to find out what's wrong and then give you the diagnosis. So, thank you. I think I've stuck to my 45 minutes. I'm quite pleased with that. I think it's back over to you, Dewi, and it's back over to any questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Alan. We haven't had any questions come through today, but if anyone does have any questions on the content today or anything else, please do let myself or your Kevin manager know. Thank you as well for everyone for attending. I hope that you found it extremely useful and informative, and there's plenty for you to take away from today. Again, big thank you to Alan as well for delivering this extremely useful webinar for us. Before you go as well, we would be extremely grateful if you could fill in the survey that's attached to the end of our exit screen today. If you can do that, that'd be fantastic. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar on Wednesday the 6th, details of which will be shared later on. So many thanks, and many thanks again to Alan, and have a nice weekend, everyone.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.